Now, over 3 million men from the Commonwealth served in the First World War. 1.5 million came from pre-partition India, 74,000 of them lost their lives, and 11 were awarded the Victoria Cross. Well, early this morning, wreaths were laid at the Delhi War Memorial, and among those taking part in the ceremony was the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and the former Army officer, Tom Tugendhat, who joins us now. Hello, thank you for being with us this morning.
Good morning, Sophie. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm good. Now, I just mentioned in the introduction to your interview that 1.5 million men from South Asia signed up to the British Army in World War I, which is an incredible number of people, really, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus. Do you think we do enough to remember their sacrifice?
No, I don't think we do enough. And we've got to remember these men who came from every village, from every community in the then undivided India, communities that are now, of course, in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, came as volunteers. They volunteered like other people who joined our armed forces in those days. They joined out of a sense of duty, out of a sense of honour, and of course, as young men for the spirit of adventure, and very much the similar reasons that people join our armed forces today. And so I think it's right that we do much more to remember them, and remember that at moments like the very early days in 1914, it was the Indians who held the line when the Germans nearly broke through to cut off the Channel ports.
As you say, these are men who volunteered, and yet they were under colonial rule. Do you think that the government should apologise to Commonwealth leaders for some of the wrongs of the past?
Well, I certainly think we should apologise for some of the wrongs that happened, and Prime Minister David Cameron did apologise for some of the wrongs that happened. But for all of us, it's important to recognise that there were wrongs, but there's also a lot that we've done together. And it's impossible today to talk about British history without speaking of India, and it's impossible today to speak of Indian history without speaking of Britain. We really are two countries that have grown up together over the past 2 centuries. And I think it's very important that we remember that we wrote the stories together, and with cooperation we can help shape the future together as well.
Talking about shaping that future, do you think there is an opportunity with Brexit to reshape relationships with the Commonwealth?
I absolutely do. I think it's extremely important that we use this moment to look hard at our relationships around the world, and none more so than our relationship with India. Look, I've been struck over the few days that I've been here at the warmth of the reception that I've received from members of Parliament, from civil society, from people from all walks of life, and the proximity of our relationship. Now, we don't agree on everything. That would be too much to expect with any country. But we have a very, very deep common understanding of the world as we see it. We share very strongly common values. We share the values of the rule of law, of democracy, of a free press, that are not found in as many countries as we would like. And certainly here in the Indo-Pacific region are absolutely vital to our future. And so I look forward, I hope, to working very much more closely with the people of India at every level.
Now, yesterday, Donald Trump missed a visit to a war cemetery because of bad weather. And I just want to read you what Sir Nicholas Soames, the Conservative MP, the grandson of Winston Churchill, said about that. He said, "They died with their face to the foe, and that pathetic, inadequate Donald Trump couldn't even defy the weather to pay his respects to the fallen. He's not fit to represent this great country." Do you agree?
Well, I'll leave Nicholas to speak for himself, but he has a certain way with words. All I'll say is I spent 4 years in Afghanistan, and I don't remember operations being cancelled when it rained. I don't remember them being cancelled for the cold. I don't remember us not refusing to soldier because the weather was inclement. I seem to remember that in Iraq and Afghanistan, when sometimes it was minus 15 and sometimes it was 50 degrees in the shade, we soldiered on.
How does your experience in Iraq and Afghanistan shape your politics? Because you've spoken about some pretty horrific things that happened. A suicide bomber, for example, blowing themselves up in the courtyard of your office in Helmand. I mean, this must have been an incredibly shaping experience for you.
Okay, all of us who've served have had the privilege of meeting some of the most impressive men and women that you'll ever likely to meet. And for me, that's what shaped my politics. It's that sense of duty that I have to our country and to the people who've given so much. And it's recognising that, Sophie, I've been blessed. I've come from an incredibly strong and loving family, and I've had the good fortune of economic stability all my life. Now, I know that many of the men and women I had the privilege to serve with did not have that. And what I've got to do is to try and make sure, as a politician, that the benefits of our society, that the good things in our society are spread as widely as possible. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do through the politics that I now practice. Now, that's where, for me, this is a continuation of a sense of duty.
Well, let's talk about that sense of duty. You said of your time in the army, in Iraq, I was one of many soldiers who questioned the decision but obeyed the orders. And I just wonder if that will be, your take on Brexit as well. How are you feeling about the deal that Theresa May is currently fighting for, and is that something that you could support?
Well, it's very hard to know what the deal is. I'm afraid unlike the two or perhaps three people who are really in the room negotiating, I'm afraid none of us actually know what the Prime Minister is going to bring forward. So until I know what the details are, I find it very difficult to comment. I'm just commenting in the dark. And that's why I have been very careful not to say too much on it, because I'd just be guessing. And what the people deserve now, the people of our country deserve now, is not more guesses from politicians as to what the future might hold, but serious, considered thought as to what the options are before us.
We've got a pretty good idea, though, haven't we, of the kind of thing that Theresa May is looking at, particularly with regards to the backstop, the whole of the UK staying in a customs union with the European Union, an effective customs union. Joe Johnson, your colleague, resigned this week, and he said that there's been a failure of British statecraft on a scale unseen since the Suez crisis. Is he right?
Well, Joe, again, has his own ways of expressing things, and there isn't a Johnson in the land who doesn't have a particularly colourful way of making their point clear. So I'll leave him to speak for himself. But I think it's, again, I'm afraid I'm going to be difficult to pin down on this, because I don't know what the Prime Minister has got as the final negotiation. And while the backstop does, of course, matter, the idea of the backstop is that it never is used. So depending on what the Prime Minister brings forward, I will then know whether or not the backstop is important or not. So I'm waiting now to hear what the Prime Minister has to say. And Joe is right in that this is an extremely important moment for the United Kingdom. This is a moment when we have decided to reset the relationship for the first time in 40 years, to really change the strategy of the United Kingdom from one of proximity trade to one of remoter trade. And now that's a really big call. But we did discuss this for quite a long time before the referendum in 2016. This was a topic of much discussion around the country, as we all remember, and many of us were very clear in the way that we considered it best to speak about the questions. And I had these debates in 2015 and I had them in 2016. So I'm afraid this isn't a huge surprise to me that the questions now before us are very difficult.
OK, I can see that you're not going to be too drawn on Brexit. You've previously said that after Brexit it's time for a generational shift in the Conservative Party. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant by that is I've got a huge privilege to sit alongside some really impressive guys on the Conservative benches. People like Vicky Atkins, who's in the Home Office at the moment, is really one of the brightest and most able people of our generation. Kit Malthouse, who's doing amazing things with housing and doing it completely brilliantly, remembering the sense of place and identity that we all need in a community. And then, of course, I can run through people like James Cleverly and Johnny Mercer and so on, who really have fantastic ways of expressing and communicating. So whether it's that generation of Rishi Sunak and Lucy Fraser, or whether it's another generation just after us of people like Paul Marsden, I just think there's a hell of an opportunity on the Conservative benches to really have some serious impact and some serious ideas to take the country forward.
Someone once said to me that the list of people who aren't running for the Conservative Party leadership will end up being longer than the list of people who are running for the Conservative Party leadership will be longer than those
exactly.
who aren't. Yeah, exactly. And I just wonder if it's something that you'd consider putting your name ahead.
At the moment, I'm just waiting to see what deal the Prime Minister brings back. I mean, I haven't made any great secret of the fact that I would consider running for my party leadership at some point. But for me, the whole point of this is not to run for the leadership; it's to change the country. For me, the whole point of this is not to be an individual, but to be a team. If one thing that soldiering taught me is that individuals we don't achieve very much, but we have an amazing Conservative team. I've listed some names there, and there are many others. And if we get the right people in the team, then actually the leadership becomes not academic, but certainly only an expression of that. And that's what we've got to get to. We've got to get a really strong Conservative team forward, arguing for the future of the country, arguing for a positive future, arguing for a future that includes everybody in our community and really values the work that so many do. And, you know, from the young to the old, you know, we have an amazingly dynamic society. Sometimes I think we forget that, and it's a great shame because it leads us to despondency when actually we should be fully optimistic. And so I'm really focused on doing my bit to support a Conservative team and see where that gets us.
It's interesting to listen to you talking about the future there. And the Conservatives have been in power for 8 years. Do you sometimes worry that the current administration, the current form of the Conservative Party, is a bit tired, a little bit consumed by Brexit?
Well, I think it's the nature of any major struggle that it consumes those who are engaged in it. I mean, we know this, whether you look at a merger or an acquisition or any sort of major operation in the military or whatever it is, you always find that those who have really focused in on it, who really had to do nothing but that for a long period of time, tend to get a bit worn out, and that's hardly surprising. But it's a credit to those who are engaged in the debate at the moment that they are devoting every inch of energy, every moment of energy, in order to try and bring forward the best outcome for the British people. And I think that's absolutely right. Now, once that is done, will people look for a change? I suspect they will, and I think it's for the Conservative Party to come forward and be that change. And I think we can be. I think we have an amazing opportunity, as I've listed already, from the number of people and ideas on our benches, to come forward and make a fantastic change and bring the country forward.
OK, Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much.